Some days don't arrive like normal days. They arrive like a mirror you didn't ask for, one that reflects the thing you've been carefully avoiding saying out loud. May 5th has that effect on people, not because a date can control your life, not because the sky can force a decision, but because timing has a way of amplifying what has already been building underneath your conversations. And on May 5, 26, the calendar and the atmosphere stack two signals on top of each other, the 5 to 5 mirror date and the Eta Aquariids meteor peak. One tends to stir restlessness and pivot energy, the difference between escaping pressure and actually upgrading the system. The other is an attention spike, inspiration without structure, ideas arriving faster than capacity, which creates the tension where discernment matters more than speed. So here's the question that matters tonight. What if the communication shift you feel coming isn't about finally finding the right words, but about finally telling the truth you've been editing for the sake of keeping the peace? Because there's a certain kind of relational strain that doesn't come from hatred or betrayal. It comes from compression. It comes from months of swallowing small disappointments until they harden into distance. It comes from repeating the same careful sentences, hoping they land differently this time, while your body already knows the pattern. You felt it. Those conversations that should be simple, but somehow carry weight. The way a text can sit in your chest for an hour. The way your tone becomes a performance. The way you plan what to say. Then you don't say it. Then you resent yourself for not saying it. Then you resent them for not noticing you didn't say it. And the worst part is that from the outside, everything can look fine. Two people still show up. Two people still do the routine. The calendar still moves forward. But inside the relationship, the truth starts living in the negative space. What's avoided? What's postponed? What's not the right time? What's not a big deal? Until one day, it becomes a big deal. Not because the topic changed, but because your capacity for pretending ran out. If that's where you've been, let me be clear. You're not too sensitive. You're not overreacting. You're not bad at communication. You're in a timing phase where your nervous system is done carrying unresolved meaning. And that doesn't make you dramatic. It makes you awake. Most people think communication problems are about language. They think if they find the perfect phrasing, the perfect approach, the perfect moment, then everything will soften. But you already know the truth. You can say things perfectly and still be misunderstood. You can speak gently and still be dismissed. You can hold your tone, watch your words, and still feel lonely after the conversation is over. That loneliness is a signal. It's the moment you realize the relationship isn't struggling because you're not explaining enough. It's struggling because the value exchange has shifted, and your communication has been trying to keep an outdated agreement alive. That agreement might sound like this. If I'm easy to love, I'll be safe. If I don't ask for too much, they'll stay. If I can manage their mood, we won't fight. If I'm logical, my needs will be respected. If I keep things calm, we're okay. Those are not communication strategies. Those are survival contracts. And when you've been operating from survival contracts, a mirror date can feel like it's turning up the volume on everything you've been minimizing. You start feeling restless in ways you can't explain. You start wanting to change the subject of your life. You start feeling the urge to do something just to release the pressure. That's the pivot energy, not reckless, not random. It's what happens when your inner truth no longer fits inside your old relational posture. And then the meteor peak arrives. Brief streaks, fast flashes, sudden brightness. It's the perfect metaphor for how insight hits in these windows. You might suddenly know exactly what you want to say. You might replay old conversations and see the pattern with humiliating clarity. You might feel a wave of courage, followed by fear, followed by the urge to backtrack. This is the moment people often confuse intensity with direction. Intensity can make you want to send the text, make the call, demand the answer, force the closure, push for clarity right now. But a communication shift that lasts is rarely built on adrenaline. It's built on accuracy. The lens today is numerology, not as fortune-telling, not as a guarantee, but as a grounded way to name cycles and value themes so you stop making every relational phase a personal failure. Historically, numerology has roots in ancient Greek and Pythagorean traditions where numbers were studied as harmony, proportion and rhythm, patterns of movement, not personality labels. In that older framing, numbers weren't used to cage people. They were used to observe timing, how life expands, contracts, matures, repeats, and evolves. And when you look at May 5, 5, through that lens, you're looking at the number that carries movement, the number that doesn't like confinement, the number that asks for an upgrade in how you adapt. 5 is the energy of change, but not always the kind you think. Sometimes it's the change from silence to speech. Sometimes it's the change from hinting to naming. Sometimes it's the change from I'm fine to I'm not okay with this. Sometimes it's the change from performing peace to practicing truth. And 5 to 5 mirrors itself, which matters. A mirror doesn't only reflect the other person, it reflects you, your habits, your default coping style, your relational reflexes, the way you over-explain, the way you shut down, the way you chase, the way you avoid, the way you try to be chosen by being convenient. That's why mirror dates often feel like pressure points. They amplify pattern recognition. They make you see the system you're inside, and they make it harder to pretend the system is working when your body has been signaling otherwise. So when we talk about a communication shift you can't ignore, we're not talking about becoming louder. We're talking about becoming truer. And truth requires maturity, because truth spoken from panic becomes a weapon, but truth spoken from clarity becomes a doorway. This is where real relationship change begins. Not when you finally get them to understand, but when you stop betraying yourself to maintain a version of connection that costs too much. You can see this pattern in real life, in ways that are almost painfully ordinary. It shows up in a relationship where one person keeps saying, "Tell me what you need," and the other person keeps answering, "Nothing," because they learned long ago that needs create inconvenience, and inconvenience creates abandonment. Months later, the nothing becomes resentment. The resentment becomes contempt. And then one day, a small comment about dishes becomes a full-body eruption that shocks both people, even though the truth is that eruption has been loading for a long time. It shows up in friendships where you're always the one checking in, always the one making the plan, always the one carrying the emotional labor. You tell yourself you don't mind because you're loyal. But then you miss one call. You have one hard week. And the silence on the other side reveals something you didn't want to admit. The friendship has been running on your effort. The moment you stop performing connection, you find out whether connection was mutual. It shows up in family dynamics where respect is used as a leash. You're expected to keep the tone polite, keep the boundaries invisible, keep the discomfort private. You're allowed to show up, but not allowed to bring your full truth with you. And every holiday becomes a test of endurance. You leave feeling drained, then you blame yourself for being too affected, when the real issue is that you've been living in a system that requires you to shrink. These are not isolated problems. These are value themes. Because relationships aren't only about affection, they're about agreements, spoken and unspoken. And communication is the mechanism that keeps agreements alive. If the agreement is outdated, communication starts failing in predictable ways. Avoidance, sarcasm, passive disappointment, over-explaining, emotional withdrawal, and the quiet dread of we need to talk. So what does May 5 ask you to do with this? Not to force a confrontation, not to create drama, not to send a message you'll regret. This window is about the difference between escaping pressure and upgrading the system. Upgrading the system starts with noticing what your current communication style is protecting. If you keep it light, what are you afraid would happen if you got honest? If you keep it logical, what emotion are you avoiding admitting? If you keep it calm, what anger have you been disqualifying? If you keep it vague, what truth are you refusing to claim? And if you keep it quiet, whose comfort have you been prioritizing over your own clarity? These questions aren't meant to accuse you. They're meant to locate you. Because people repeat what once protected them. And the tragedy is that what protected you in one season can imprison you in another. The communication shift is rarely about suddenly becoming someone else. It's about stopping the reflex that used to keep you safe when safety required you to be smaller. So here's how you integrate this in a way that's grounded, not impulsive. Start by separating urgency from truth. If you feel an intense desire to fix it tonight, pause long enough to ask, am I trying to express truth? Or am I trying to relieve anxiety? Anxiety wants immediate relief. Truth wants clean expression. They feel similar in the body, but they create very different outcomes. Then move towards specificity. Most relational conflict isn't caused by big feelings. It's caused by vague ones. You never listen. You don't care. You always do this. Those sentences are emotional smoke. They signal pain, but they don't offer a door. A system upgrade sounds different. It sounds like, when I shared that and you changed the subject, I felt alone. It sounds like, when plans change last minute, my nervous system doesn't settle. It sounds like, when I'm the only one initiating, I start questioning whether I matter. Specificity doesn't guarantee agreement, but it does guarantee clarity. Next, watch your pacing. A mirror date window can stir restlessness. It can make you want to rush the conversation because you're tired of carrying it. But relational repair happens at the speed of safety. Emotional timing and logical timing don't always match, and forcing emotional timing tends to create more resistance, not more truth. So instead of demanding the entire relationship be solved in one conversation, aim for clean sentences that don't require performance. Not a monologue, not a courtroom. One honest statement you can stand behind tomorrow, even when the intensity passes. Then set a boundary with yourself about what you'll do if nothing changes. This is where people avoid maturity, because they think boundaries are threats. They're not. Boundaries are self-respect made visible. A boundary might mean you stop chasing, you stop over-explaining, you stop initiating every time, you stop attending spaces where your truth must be edited to be allowed. You don't have to punish anyone. You simply stop abandoning yourself to keep the connection. Finally, make room for the possibility that the shift is inside you first. Sometimes the communication shift you can't ignore is the moment you realize you've been waiting for permission. Permission to be direct. Permission to be disappointed. Permission to want more. Permission to name what you feel. Permission to stop negotiating your needs like they're a burden. That permission changes everything. Because once you stop treating your truth like contraband, you start relating differently. You start speaking with less fear. You start listening with less defensiveness. You start noticing who can meet you in honesty and who can only meet you in convenience. And if you're in a relationship that's worth keeping, something powerful can happen here. The conversation becomes less about winning and more about seeing, less about proving and more about rebuilding, less about you versus me and more about what are we actually creating together and what is it costing both of us. If you're in a relationship that isn't safe for truth, you'll learn something too. Not because you were wrong to try, but because truth exposes systems that depend on your silence. In those cases, your clarity is still a win. It returns you to yourself. The after state of this kind of shift isn't constant harmony. It's something better. Self-respect. You stop feeling like you have to audition for understanding. You stop twisting yourself into the right tone. You stop carrying the emotional labor alone and calling it love. You begin to feel steadier in your own chest. You begin to speak with less apology. You begin to choose fewer words, but truer ones. You begin to trust that connection built on honesty is the only kind that can actually hold your future. And you might notice something surprising. The more you respect your own truth, the less you need to chase anyone else's response. You become less reactive, less frantic, less eager to fix, more willing to let reality reveal itself. That's not coldness. That's maturity. May faith is a mirror, and mirrors don't lie. They show you what you've been doing. They show you what you've been tolerating. They show you where you've been confusing endurance with devotion. And when the night sky is streaking with brief flashes, it's a reminder that insight can be sudden. But integration is the real work. So don't confuse a bright moment with a finished transformation. Let the bright moment tell you what's true, then let your next choices prove you heard it. Now sit with this. When you think about the conversation you've been avoiding, what is the one sentence you keep editing, softening, or swallowing? And what would change in your relationship if you said it with calm clarity instead of waiting for the perfect moment? The communication shift isn't that you finally find the right words. It's that you stop using silence as a strategy and you start treating your truth like something that deserves air. If this episode named what you've been carrying, share it with someone who keeps being fine while their real feelings sit unsaid. And if you want more timing-based clarity that stays grounded and human, subscribe, because your next season of love deserves language that doesn't betray you.